Hello, and welcome to Armchair Philosophies podcast with your host, Peter. And this episode is going to be a follow-up on my previous episode about this Try That in a Small Town country song that was garnering a bunch of controversy, because I got a comment on that video. The comment was from somebody who described himself as a longtime subscriber, so thank you for that. But the comment was saying that I was wearing my contempt and disgust on my sleeve, and saying that there are some feelings had by working class people in small towns about things like law and order, and wouldn't it be better to explore these issues and try and bring them into the fold, bring them into the tent? And on one hand, I think everyone should bear in mind that my jibes at small-town America and, meth heads stealing your catalytic converter are in the context of pushing back on a song that was very holier-than-thou and very Fox News brain. At the same time, though, I can't disguise the fact that I do have contempt and wear that on my sleeve for a very particular type of Trumpist. So there's a type of Trumpist who, I'm going to make the very controversial statement that Donald Trump is an asshole. I know, completely controversial statement. And some people love him, not in spite of that, but because of it. Because it gives voice to their inner asshole. And yeah, I do have contempt and disgust for those people. And to a certain extent, I think that we can easily fall into the trap of fooling ourselves that, we can just reason with these people, and if we just talk them out. There is, with any sort of debate, people you can persuade and people you can't. And this is something that I learned talking about religion back in the day. There are certain creationists, they're just not going to budge. No matter how valid your argument, no matter how factual, logical, what you're saying is, they are in their own little world that they're not going to budge from. There is some hope for convincing some people, but the reality is there's already so much out there in terms of political discussion, discussing the ideas on the left, on the right, whatever. It's not as if there's some shortage of messaging out there. It's about who it's reaching. And the reality with right-wing propaganda is that they often have billionaires funding them. When you look at many of the popular media empires on YouTube or on cable television, obviously Fox News is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who's a billionaire. You have many of the right-wing organizations and YouTube stars that got their start by being funded by millionaires and billionaires. There's a complete asymmetry of money when it comes to the ideas on the left versus the ideas on the right. Nonetheless, the ideas and the perspectives and the information is all out there. And after Donald Trump's election, there was this massive collective hand-wringing on the left and amongst Democrats over how we're not reaching the white working class, or we're not reaching groups X, Y, and Z. But you have to ask yourself, what more can really be done? It's not as if the information and the ideas weren't out there. Were they curious to understand or to know? When you face the problem of low information voters, poorly educated voters, as the media likes to call them, or people whose heads are 2 millimeters from disappearing up Fox News's or right-wing media's ass, what exactly are you supposed to do? Like, start going door to door? There's not much that needs to be said that isn't being said by someone. And the brutally honest truth is, for me, aside from the contempt and disgust that I feel towards a certain type of person who behaves like an asshole and therefore deserves to be treated like an asshole, I've come to realize that what the election of Trump highlighted for me is that the most powerful political group in the country is actually the most difficult to confront or deal with, which is what, the media likes to call the low information voters and or poorly educated voters. Because although they can correctly identify problems, their ideas as to the causes and the solutions are what make you facepalm. And you really just reach a point where compassion fatigue sets in. And you throw up your arms and say, okay, you know what? All this hand-wringing over the white working class, look, they got what they voted for the last 40 years. And if they cannot look past all of the bullshit Republicans talk about, like Jesus and abortion and guns and the politics of grievance, look past all of that to what Republicans actually do with power, see what they're truly about, and then realize it's not in their interest to vote for them, then it's hard not to start to feel like they deserve what they get. I still have sympathy for the people who are frustrated over the fact that after the success of Reagan and then Bush Sr., Democrats basically became diet Republicans. But when I was talking about that country song, Try That in a Small Town, glorifying vigilante justice, hot on the coattails of that song, there's another country song called Rich Men North of Richmond, which of course blames everything on our political figures, because God forbid they turn on their corporate lords and masters. And the song, while talking about the struggles of the working class and bullshit pay and deaths of despair, also takes time to make QAnon references and kick down on people on welfare, saying they're 300-pound people spending other people's tax dollars on junk food. Well, guess what, buddy? If you kick every overweight person off of food stamps, your pay's still gonna suck. Do you know why your pay is gonna suck? Because the Republican Party destroyed organized labor in this country and has constantly been on the side of corporate America and the rich, cutting their taxes while pushing the burden and the debt onto you. They gave you voodoo economics about how if you just cut the corporate taxes, it will trickle down. It didn't work, in spite of the fact that they tried it under Reagan. They tried it under George W. Bush. They tried it under Trump. It never works the way they say it's going to. It balloons the deficit because it's reducing federal revenue, but they just keep telling you this time it's going to work. We're going to cut taxes, and you think it's your taxes until you look at the details and realize it's not your taxes they're cutting. But low information, poorly educated people can be easily distracted by coming up with narratives about how it's the unworthy poor spending your tax money on junk food even though they weigh 300 pounds, instead of actually thinking through what policies would address things like wages and homelessness. It's like half of this country wants the government to stay the hell out of their lives, and the same half of the country is pissed off that the government doesn't do anything to help them, and is pissed off that the government is somehow helping everyone but them. I mean, we've probably all met these people who, they have personal problems, they love to complain about their problems, and then you offer them concrete solutions, and they come up with a bunch of reasons why they can't or won't act on any of the solutions to their problems. Or they'll blame somebody else, or they'll go on some sort of tangent, and they'll just make you throw up your hands in frustration, or to start tuning out when they complain about their problems. And that's how I feel about a large segment of America. So they'll say, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay, and you go, okay, so let's raise the minimum wage. Well, that's not fair to all the people who, this other person over here, you see, they do this hard job, and they shouldn't be making as much as somebody making fries. So, okay, it's on you to go get a better paying job then. And they say, Lord, we got folks in the street, ain't got nothing to eat, so are we going to house the homeless? Are we going to feed the homeless? Well, no, if they want to get off the blah, 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 they They're going to come up with a whole bunch of reasons why tax money should not be spent on the homeless. Oh, they're just too lazy to get a job. It's always going to be some excuse. They'll point out a problem, and then you go, okay, how are we going to solve this? And they go, it's their problem. Or when a problem is pointed out and you bring up a solution, are we going to house the homeless? They're going to be like, well, what about this other problem over here? They'll start engaging in whataboutisms when you say, hey, maybe we should actually come up with a concrete solution to this problem. They claim to love capitalism and hate socialism, but everyone suddenly becomes a socialist at the gas pump. But at the same time, they'll turn around and deny climate change based on the climate denial information they received from people getting paid by the petroleum industry that they hate. They love capitalism and they will defend it to the death, but they hate the effects of capitalism because it screwed them over. And that, as somebody who went to liberal brainwashing factory, there's this weird experience you have, right, where I took this class called The Sociology of Work, right? And in this class, we're reading about the working class and how these policies, like the trade deals, took their jobs, moved them overseas, devastated these towns. And you go, oh, that's terrible. capitalism is a system where people are disposable, where regardless of your personal work ethic, whether or not you can get a job with decency is not entirely within your control, that the system requires an underclass. And so you get all these college-educated people who are down on capitalism, and then you have all these other people who will defend capitalism to the death in spite of the fact that it is the system that screwed them over, because they find anyone and anything else to blame, rather than confronting the system itself. They won't turn and bite the hand of their corporate lords and masters. It's got to be the rich men north of Richmond. It's all politicians' fault. But they won't propose any actual solutions to the things that they complain about. The moment you point out that solving the things they're complaining about might involve spending money, suddenly, nope. Or they'll just what about shift it to another problem that they think is more urgent. And this lack of consistency and this lack of coherence makes it so that they are so much more influenceable, controllable, gettable by those who are working through the politics of grievance and the politics of nihilism than the sort of people who would want constructive, pragmatic answers to the problems. The people who want constructive, pragmatic solutions end up chasing their tail, dealing with these people. But their frustration and their anger and their nihilistic outlook on politics can activate them to vote for somebody like Trump, because he'll just blow up the system in their mind. And that's part of how Trump won. Maybe the main part of how he, aside from having the general Republican voters and general Republican establishment behind him, is that he was able to mobilize otherwise apathetic voters with this nihilistic style of blow everything up politics. Because when you can't come up with coherent, pragmatic solutions to problems, when you chase your tail pointing out a problem, but then getting on some tangent about some other alleged cause like 300-pound people buying fudge rounds instead of coming up with a solution to the problem you're complaining about, and you keep voting for a party that spent the last 40 years bending over the working class and fisting it up the ass without lube, because they tell you, Jesus, 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 guns, guns, guns. And you go, yeah, Jesus and guns, voting for them. Jesus, guns, freedom, voting for them. I don't like taxes. And they say they're going to cut taxes. And I'm sure they mean when they say they're going to cut taxes, they're going to cut my taxes and not just, they wouldn't just cut corporate taxes and taxes on billionaires again. I mean, they've done that 3 times already. This time they're going to cut my taxes. I swear. When they continuously vote for a party that uses their power to serve their corporate lords and masters and then go, why have I been screwed over by this system? When they're unable to even think of things in terms of a system, it becomes incredibly frustrating to try and deal with those people, try and reason with them, because they cast aside any sort of solution you offer with some excuse, some distraction, some reference to QAnon or guns or the politics of nihilism. At some point, you just want to throw up your arms and say, okay, suffer the consequences. And I say all of this just to be brutally honest with this commenter, with my subscribers and viewers in general, that the overwhelming feeling that I have when discussing these sorts of things is not contempt or disgust, although I feel that towards certain particular people, but overwhelming frustration. That the biggest impediment to solving many of these problems is the people complaining about them, because they seem unable to grasp or tolerate anything like a practical solution. They're that friend you have that constantly complains, but has every excuse in the world for why they can't solve their problems, and that you know deep down they themselves are in certain ways responsible for their own problems. And it seems that it is these low information, often poorly educated, generally apathetic but occasionally mobilized voters who are not necessarily the ideological foot soldiers on either side, but are the ones who come in and tip the balance either way. And to be fair, and I'm doing the exact same thing again, where I spent most of the video complaining about a certain type of person and then, oh, and by the way, at the very last moment. To be fair, there are a lot of people who got behind Trump, who kind of fell into this. They can get angry at politicians and at the political system and blaming all the problems on things that rarely have anything to do with the problem or are only tangentially related to the problem. But a surprising number of these people actually did start to see through Trump's bullshit. And I almost feel at this point in the video of apologizing to anyone who's made it this far for listening to my cathartic rant of basically getting a comment saying, gee, I think you're wearing your contempt and disgust on your sleeve. And I said, oh, you think so? Hold my beer. But in the future, I've been thinking about these issues, and I would like to make some videos that are essentially more in the style of an open letter to certain types of people, where I lay out in a brutally honest fashion my issues with them. And that's certainly different from trying to be conciliatory and let's bring them into the tent, because sometimes it's going to be like, here's why I think you're a rube. But I think being brutally honest here at this point in my life, that is the closest I can come to being conciliatory. That's enough ranting for now. Some of you will appreciate it, some of you won't, but at this point in my YouTube career, I am mostly just doing my damnedest to appease the algorithms of the machine spirit. So, in that vein, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Thank you to PGRO for your comment and for being a longtime subscriber. And have a good whatever time it is.